Power Talk AM 1460 and FM 101.1. Streaming worldwide on iHeartRadio. Jan Price talks to the movers and shakers in the film business. The Jan Price Show.
You're listening to The Jan Price Show, and today my guest is director-producer Kimberly Reed, and we're going to be talking about her brand new documentary entitled Dark Money, which is a timely, very timely documentary, and I'm very excited to talk about it. Welcome, Kimberly.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thank you. This is a very fascinating and as I said, timely documentary, and I really want to get into it in more detail. But before we do, I really want to start with what is your background? How did you become a documentary filmmaker?
Sometimes I think it's just because I couldn't decide on any of the other arts, and I just like this kind of multimedia collage construction that filmmaking is. I mean, I remember in college trying to decide, because I really liked writing, I really liked music, I really liked photography, and then I decided I was just going to not choose one of those disciplines and put them all together and make movies. I had always been fascinated with it because my father was he was an ophthalmologist, so he had all of these lenses and projectors and just visual apparatus. Is that how you say it? And,
not sure.
And so my brothers and I would, when we would sort of goof around in Dad's office and play, it was all about, giving each other eye exams. So I don't know, maybe that gave me a bit of a fascination with how these visual systems work and cameras. He always had a bunch of cameras kicking around that I could use, and I somehow convinced some of my early, even in grade school, teachers to let me make a film instead of writing a paper. And that's just kind of how it started. I've always been really interested in this multidisciplinary art form.
What a wonderful way to start, having that kind of a background. What was your first documentary that you did?
The first documentary that I directed is called Prodigal Sons. It actually came out about 10 years ago in festivals, about 8 years ago, and came out in 2010 in theaters, where it made its sort of public debut, opened at the Telluride Film Festival. And in a lot of ways, it's a pretty different film than the one that we're talking about primarily today, Dark Money. Prodigal Sons is autobiographical. It's about me going back to my childhood home where I was raised in Montana. And I'm transgender, and I was going back for the first time in a long time. And the biggest thing in front of me at the time was just kind of reconnecting with my older brother. He was adopted, and I was not adopted. He was a year older than me, but he was held back in preschool, actually, so that we were always in the same grade, and had this, from his end, he was feeling quite a strong sibling rivalry. I wasn't, but it led to us being pretty have a pretty strained relationship for a long time, especially after I basically left home and went to college and transitioned. And the film kind of takes place on the eve of us kind of reconnecting, actually around a high school reunion that sort of brought us together. And it's interesting, I think, because I sort of had this new personality that I was coming back home with, and my brother, who was adopted, you'll remember, he finds out that he's related to just enormously famous Hollywood royalty.
Oh, wow.
So the two of us kind of have these new identities, and it's about us trying to reconcile over this complicated relationship with these two new identities.
Sounds absolutely fascinating. I'm going to have to search for that. Can you get that on Netflix? Where can we find it?
Yeah, it's on Netflix and iTunes and stuff like that. You can go to prodigalsonsfilm.com and stream it from there, stream it from other places. But yeah, it's still available.
Can you say who your brother is the son of?
I could, but then that would be a spoiler alert. I think you will not be disappointed when you find out, but hopefully you will also have forgotten about this interview, because my favorite review of Prodigal Sons at the time said, "Don't read a word about Prodigal Sons and do not miss it." So
Wow.
I've probably already said too much.
Well, you got enough to pique our interest, that's for sure.
Yeah.
I'm going to go search for this one because it sounds fascinating. Yeah, very much so. So, dark money, let's get in, because there's a lot to this. Let's jump in, and because your journey to making this movie was rather fascinating too. So tell us a little bit about the why you decided to do this.
Yeah, well, since we're talking about Prodigal Sons, in the intervening years, I kind of edited a film and produced a couple, and was looking for my next big project. And I think, like a lot of people, in 2010, the U.S. Supreme Court came down with a decision called Citizens United that a lot of people know because of this sort of catchphrases that it's known by. And those are that the Supreme Court said that money is speech and that corporations are people. So if people have free speech rights, then, corporations should have free speech rights, right?
Right. One of the worst decisions ever made by the Supreme Court, actually.
Yeah.
But go on.
And you are not alone in feeling that way. And actually, since Citizens United came down, about like every year, several times a year, there have been surveys of and polling, and it's really remarkably consistent that about 75-80% of the American public thinks that it's a terrible decision and that our campaign finance system is totally broken and needs to be reformed. And that's what the kind of question that I started with in terms of making dark money is this question about how did we get here? How could Supreme Court jurisprudence lead us to a spot where they're saying that money is speech and corporations are people, therefore corporations can give unlimited money to political campaigns? It just seemed completely anti-democratic with a small d, right? It was just going to take political power and put it into the hands of a couple super wealthy people and take that political power away from everyday citizens. And it just seemed more like rules you would have in an oligarchy than in a democracy. And didn't quite know what to do with that, big complex story. For a couple of years, I didn't quite know how to approach it until in 2012, I heard that my home state of Montana, again, where I have a lot of access, know people, I heard that Montana had a case that was going to go to the Supreme Court and had the ability to overturn Citizens United. And it just seemed like a really good way to kind of continue those questions. I mean, I wasn't really somebody who was really following every move of the Supreme Court or, all these legal proceedings. I certainly was not an expert at all in campaign finance and how that whole system of donating money to political campaigns was working. So with those questions of how did we get here, I figured that was a really good way to talk about what was an enormously important issue about the money that fuels and is the lifeblood of our political campaigns by focusing on this case that was going to the U.S. Supreme Court. And Montana at the time in 2012 was the only state that was resisting Citizens United and saying essentially Montana was saying, we've been through this before. And actually we have laws that have been created because we saw what happens when you have a bunch of uninhibited corporate money in politics. And actually 100 years ago, Montana, let me back up one step and just say, Montana is a state where there are not a ton of people. Actually, fewer. Montana just cracked a million residents, and it's the fourth largest state, right? It's enormous, and hardly anybody lives there. It also has a lot of natural resources, and that has consistently been, kind of something where industrialists and magnates look at Montana and kind of see dollar signs in their eyes, and that certainly happened 100 years ago when the richest people in the world really gathered in Butte, Montana, which was known as the richest hill on earth at the time. Mm-hmm. I'm talking to you from New York, and the building that I'm in right now is probably wired up with copper wire that came from Butte, Montana, came from the richest hill on earth, and which is proud of electrifying the nation. And so a bunch of industrialists headed from New York out to Butte and try to just kind of corner the market on copper. And there were a lot of big battles. Some of them eventually won out, and the strategy that everybody took at the time were these battle between what were called the Copper Kings. The game plan for that was basically you buy up all the mines, you buy up all the company stores so that people working in the mine towns have to shop at the company store. You buy up all the newspapers, and if that's not enough, they would literally buy up all the politicians. And people say that all the time, that politicians are bought and paid for, but what was happening then it was a time when the state legislators would elect senators. We're talking like William A. Clark took out ads in his own newspaper to offer $10,000 to any legislator that would vote for him to be actually Montana's first U.S. senator.
Wow.
Just absolutely rampant corruption that people were really incensed by. And so in 1912, there was a ballot initiative, a citizens' voter initiative, that said corporate money in politics is corrupting, is ruining our state. We don't want to be run by corporations. We want, democracy to function. We want the people to run this state. And we are therefore going to ban political spending. We're going to ban corporate spending in political campaigns. So that was called the Corrupt Practices Act of 1912. And that law stood for 100 years until 2012, when, in the wake of Citizens United, Montana was essentially forced to allow corporate contributions in political campaigns. And the Attorney General at the time, his name is Steve Bullock, argued, we've been through this before. We've done that rodeo before, to use a Montana metaphor. And we have seen the corrupting influence of money in politics, and we don't want to go there again. So they challenged, they challenged Citizens United. Now, that's when I first started filming. I was hoping that it was going to be, a 6-month project of, Mr. Bullock goes to Washington and overturns Citizens United. We'll be in and out pretty quickly. That 6-month project turned into a 6-year project.
Wow.
Whereby I kind of went back to Montana and saw how complex the shell game was to hide these contributions in political campaigns using dark money groups. I also saw that, the most fundamental thing that I saw when I went back and looked into this subject for kind of following these questions, the initial questions that I had, I saw that my own home state was really the best case study to look at all of these issues of campaign finance reform, of money and politics, and how that whole system functions. And I also saw that Montana was the battleground, that the same group of lawyers who were behind Citizens United were literally opening shop in Montana. They were opening satellite offices so that they could attack Montana's relatively strong campaign finance laws, because, if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere in terms of campaign finance.
We're going to come right back. We're going to have to take a quick break, Kimberly, but this is fascinating. So I want to just remember where you're at, and we'll come right back. You're listening to The Jan Price Show, all about movies on Power Talk 1460 and 101 FM. Like The Jan Price Show on Facebook, and check out thejanpriceshow.com. The Ozio Theater in downtown Monterey is now open every day, showing independent and foreign films. The Ozio Theater has new concession offerings, including beer, wine, hard cider, and their homemade Lush Slush. You can now schedule private event screenings for community charity events, birthdays, anniversaries, or just a fun gathering of friends. For more information, visit the Ozio Theater online at oziotheater.com.
Tired of looking at your worn wood floors? Mr. Sandless can bring them back to life again. That's right, it's Mr. Sandless, the no sanding solution to beautiful wood floors. Mr. Sandless is clean, efficient, contains no harmful chemicals, and is certified green. Mr. Sandless refinishes all hardwoods, softwoods, engineered flooring, and laminates. Most jobs are completed in one day with no cleanup required ever, with virtually no odor, and is safe for pets and kids. No need to move out or even leave the house. Mr. Sandless is the company that invented Sandless Refinishing and is the largest floor refinishing company in the world. Over 120,000 happy customers, guaranteed adhesion, guaranteed satisfaction, and a 5-year warranty. Call Mr. Sandless today at 831-747-7476. That's 747-7476. Or MrSandless.com. That's MrSandless.com.
On Power Talk AM 1460 and FM 101.1. Streaming worldwide on iHeartRadio. Jan Price talks to the movers and shakers in the film business. The Jan Price Show.
We are back, and my guest today is director-producer Kimberly Reed, and we're talking about her brand new documentary called Dark Money. So, Kimberly, before the break, you were just telling us a little bit about this, why you decided to go to Montana to film this, against the Citizens United. So can you pick up where we left off?
Yeah, I mean, kind of when I went back, I saw that there were that Montana was the real battleground state, that this is where these lawyers, the same group of lawyers who were behind Citizens United, were opening offices in Montana, and they're kind of launching an attack on Montana's campaign finance laws. But there's another side to that clash, right? Which is typically something you don't have with campaign finance issues. But in Montana, we had a bunch of citizens who knew the history, who knew the impact of money in politics, and were really standing up and resisting these folks coming in and basically doing what felt like had happened in Montana 100 years earlier. So we were, we just kind of, the ground was set to have a clash between these people who are trying to erode Montana's campaign finance laws and a bunch of citizens who wanted to keep elections clean and keep corporate and union and even individual money out of politics if it was going to be unlimited. So that was kind of the main thing that I saw as the lay of the land for how this dramatic clash was going to develop. And I basically signed up for the long haul. It became pretty clear that you can't just parachute in and tell this story based on one election cycle, that you needed to be really patient and stick with it. And I ended up sticking with it for 3 election cycles and basically taken about 6 years to make the film.
Wow. That's so, you really were dedicated to this. So interesting, the perspective that you have used in this film. So you found a young reporter that you followed his story. So tell us a little bit about that. The journalist you found a.
Yeah, when you deal with stories about campaign finance, they can, they're not the sexiest stories around, right? You're
right,
talking about
right.
financial data moving around, and the big kind of dramatic high point for a lot of these things that happen is when, I don't know, like somebody hits return to send an email. It's not the most cinematic stuff. So I did some studying, and a lot of people know the film All the President's Men,
right?
And that becomes a really suspenseful film because you're following these journalists as they're figuring out the story. It becomes a mystery novel, and they're sorting it out, and it can be fun as a viewer to go along for that ride. Initially, when I went to Montana, I was following the reporting of a couple people, and as I said, with this culture of people paying attention to money and politics, there was a lot of press coverage of the issue. There was a guy named Chuck Johnson, a guy named Mike Dennison that were doing a great job of covering the beat. There was also a guy named John Adams, whose reporting I was really using and appreciating, and eventually met. When we first met, we were just kind of comparing notes and commiserating because we were following the same big story. But I finally, just convinced John to go on camera, knowing that it would be really good. It would be a really good narrative structuring device to see this world of campaign finance, of money and politics, to see that through his eyes as he's wending his way about. And I kept calling him Virgil, like taking us through the underworld, all this money and politics stuff. And, lo and behold, we came across some really remarkable twists and turns, some accidental disclosures of evidence that led to, court cases, which is where our film ultimately resolves. Everything that we were following ends up in this big week-long court case that the whole state was watching. And, we did both of us just kind of went along for a ride with everybody looking at this story through John's eyes.
Well, it's real interesting in that way. So I also love the archival footage that you used. How did you locate that kind of footage to start your film off with?
Yeah, a lot of it was just having a really good archival researcher. A lot of it was there have been a couple films made. There's one called Butte America, which was a great archival documentary film that had done a lot of the research that was helpful because we could kind of follow the tracks that they had laid down to see where some of that footage existed. But yeah, most of it just had to do with kind of laying down this historical narrative that I just told you, and finding different ways to illustrate that. And luckily, there's a fair amount of archival footage from those times that was shot in the mines. I mean, they were a bit of a novelty in the day. They were sort of seen as these engineering wonders, and look, these men can take an elevator 2 miles down into the earth, and so people were very fascinated by it and tended to shoot a lot of footage of it.
That was lucky that that you were able to find that. It's interesting. I've been reading a biography of Gary Cooper, and he's from Butte, Montana, his family, and his father, I think, became a federal judge, if I'm not mistaken. And so it talks a little bit about the political scene that you were describing, because Gary Cooper was born, I think, in 1901. His father, was there prominently for a long time, and then ended up in California. And Gary went ahead of time, but then his parents went and moved there too. So it's interesting because they're a part of that history that you're describing.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I think I'm from Helena, where people are very proud that, like, he lived there, I think, for 6 months or something, and they kind of claim Gary Cooper as well. I think he was.
I think the whole state probably claims him.
Yeah, I think you're right about that, and it's fun because actually our film is opening in my hometown of Helena, Montana, at something called the Myrna Loy Center, which is actually an old jail. But because Myrna Loy was also from my hometown, they named the old jailhouse cleaning room after her. I hope she would be proud of that.
Yeah, I wonder. Interesting, right? I did not know she was from there too. So very fascinating. So let's take a quick break and we'll come back and pick up where we left off. You're listening to the Jan Price Show, all about movies on Power Talk 1460 and 101 FM. Like the Jan Price Show on Facebook and check out thejanpriceshow.com.
Have you ever dreamed of doing commercials or movies? Your dream starts with a desire. And if you have the desire to do commercials and feature films, we want to know about you. We're Moco Film, one of the Genesis companies that includes VoiceJock, a major provider of TV commercial talent to TV stations throughout the nation. Registering is free. Just go to mocofilm.com and fill out the information. That's MOCOfilm.com. You'll become part of a large talent bank available to producers. Go to mocofilm.com today and start living your dream.
The Century Theater at Northridge Mall is newly remodeled with luxury loungers in every auditorium. Oversized plush recliners are electric-powered reclining seats with extendable footrests, cup holders, and snack tables. Guaranteed comfort with all reserved seating. Reserve the best seat in town online at Cinemark.com or download the Cinemark app today. The Century Theater at Northridge Mall is newly remodeled.
On Power Talk AM 1460 and FM 101.1. Streaming worldwide on iHeartRadio. Jan Price talks to the movers and shakers in the film business. The Jan Price Show.
We are back, and my guest today is director-producer Kimberly Reed, and we're talking about her brand new documentary, a very timely documentary, entitled Dark Money. Kimberly, you said you played a game of whack-a-mole, and I don't know what whack-a-mole is. So can you tell me what that is and what you meant by that?
Yeah, so whack-a-mole is when you go to the carnival, and they have it's a very old game where they have these ugly-looking gophers or moles that pop their heads up out of this game, and you have a mallet in your hand, and it's your job to knock each of these moles that sticks their head out of the ground, to knock them on the head with your mallet. And then if you hit them on the head, you get a point. And then it becomes very complicated because they pop up very quickly and they're very hard to reach and they're all over the place and it accelerates. So that's whack-a-mole.
Okay.
And that's what dark money groups do. What you see with these dark money groups, which are technically they're 501c4, they're usually 501c4 nonprofit organizations that, are supposed to exist as social welfare groups that are doing things for the public good. That like I'm actually a member of a 501c4 group, which is our neighborhood organization, and so it's a membership organization, and then once a year we clean up the park, and we take a little bit of leftover money from the memberships and plant a couple trees. I mean, that's what most nonprofit, social welfare nonprofit organizations are supposed to be doing. But what has happened since Citizens United is that political operatives have seen fit to use these groups to funnel a lot of money through, because these 501c4s don't have to show who is giving them money. You can tie it to donors. So that's how the whole game works. And what happens is that the game of whack-a-mole starts to take place, because if you want to hide money in this one dark money group for one election cycle, if you maintain that same dark money group for cycle after cycle after cycle, eventually you're probably going to get figured out, and people are going to know, well, that's the person behind that social welfare group. That's and this other person over there is a rich person who's given all the money to him, or that corporation over here, or that union over there. And so what these groups tend to do is, well, first of all, you give yourself a name like, Americans for apple pie and wonderful things and puppies. Something that just sounds. How could you ever argue with the goal of this C4 group? And then they usually pop up and funnel lots of money into an election, and then close up shop soon after the election. A lot of times, the same group of people, same funders, pop up the next election cycle as a different nonprofit group with a equally patriotic sounding name. And so that's where the game of whack-a-mole comes from, and that's what makes it so hard to track where this money is coming from. And, you got to ask yourself, why are these groups doing this? Like, why? You can actually give unlimited money to a super PAC and spend in elections that way. Super PACs have to show where their money is coming from. They have to reveal their donor. C4 groups don't. So, why are all these people going to all this trouble to create these whack-a-mole groups that are popping up and down? And the answer always comes back to, it's just something they don't want their fingerprints on. Usually it means that they're funding negative political attack ads, and I think they're in large part responsible for the increased negativity and polarization and general nastiness that's been going on in political campaigns since Citizens United came down in 2010. So that's whack-a-mole for you.
Yeah, but I mean, it boggles my brain to think, how could this even possibly be legal in any sense of the word, to be doing this? I mean, I know recently we had a campaign here locally, and unfortunately this woman decided to do a negative campaign against her opponent, and boy, the backlash was so strong and immediate. She did lose the election by a huge amount. So I think people are just going, we're done with this. We're kind of done with the negativity. We need positivity. We need to know what you stand for and what you're about, rather than all the negative, name calling and everything else. At least we hope so. Let's put it that way. At least locally here, that's what happened. But it's just amazing. So in this process, because you did it through over 3 election cycles, so tell our listeners a little bit what you discovered about this as you were digging deeper into this, while you were doing this documentary.
Well, I won't give away any spoilers, but what we find in digging into this mystery novel is that at first we saw a group that was called Western Tradition Partnership, which was a 501c4 nonprofit organization that was doing a lot of political work. In fact, it looked like they were just running campaigns for candidates in a way that the candidate didn't have to do anything. They were just kind of handed over to this group so that they would run the campaign on their behalf. And that, under campaign finance law, is completely illegal. That is just the one thing you can't do, is have these groups, which are sometimes referred to as outside groups. What are they outside of? They're outside of the campaign. These groups are supposed to be completely independent of the candidates in their campaign. But what we saw right away is this group, Western Tradition Partnership, seemed to be coordinating with these candidates. Then, in this kind of fine game of whack-a-mole, their name got changed to American Tradition Partnership. And what we really dig into in the film is false front after false front after false front. A series of these kind of fake social welfare C4 groups that kind of pretend to be for one thing, but they're really for something else. And we kind of ultimately trace that back and pull back the curtain to figure out who's behind it all. And it turns out to be this national organization that has been running this scheme to take over elections in states all across the nation.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. So were you able, through the film. I mean, you show both sides of the aisle on this issue. So tell us a little bit about that, and how was that? Why did you decide to do that?
Yeah, with a film that, as I kind of started out saying, campaign finance reform is not a partisan issue. There are people on the right and left, everything in between, all shades of the political spectrum, who think that having huge, unlimited, especially anonymous money in politics is just not the way to run elections. There's a lot of agreement across the political aisle that campaign finance, our campaign finance system, needs to be reformed. So if we're talking about this issue, which is really bipartisan, I had to go to great lengths to make sure that we weren't making a partisan film. Mm-hmm. And what we were seeing in Montana was that, for the most part, what was going on there, and this is sort of the microcosm that we look at to tell the story of how these shell games work, what we were seeing is Republicans from the far right wing of their party attacking other Republicans because they didn't think they were, pure enough, and I'm putting pure in air quotes. So it was, by just kind of showing that this is not about Republicans versus Democrats, this is not about red versus blue, this is about people playing by the rules and people breaking the rules. And, there's plenty of Republicans who felt like it was just not fair to break these rules and to fight nasty. And the actual kind of changes that we see take place, the reforms that were enacted in Montana, actually took place through a coalition of Republicans who controlled both houses of the legislature at the time, working in conjunction with a Democratic governor to pass some of the strongest campaign finance laws that they have in the country. And really, California also has fairly strong campaign finance laws, and those are two good examples for the rest of the country to follow.
Exactly. Excellent. We're going to get another quick break, and we'll be right back after these brief messages. You're listening to The Jan Price Show, all about movies on Power Talk 1460 and 101 FM, like The Jan Price Show on Facebook and thejanpriceshow.com. The Ozio Theater in downtown Monterey is now open every day, showing independent and foreign films. The Ozio Theater has new concession offerings, including beer, wine, hard cider, and their homemade Lush Slush. You can now schedule private event screenings for community charity events, birthdays, anniversaries, or just a fun gathering of friends. For more information, visit the Ozio Theater online at oziotheater.com.
Tired of looking at your worn wood floors? Mr. Sandless can bring them back to life again. That's right. It's Mr. Sandless, the no sanding solution to beautiful wood floors. Mr. Sandless is clean, efficient, contains no harmful chemicals, and is certified green. Mr. Sandless refinishes all hardwoods, softwoods, engineered flooring, and laminates. Most jobs are completed in one day with no cleanup required ever, with virtually no odor, and is safe for pets and kids. No need to move out or even leave the house. Mr. Sandless is the company that invented Sandless Refinishing and is the largest floor refinishing company in the world. Over 120,000 happy customers, guaranteed adhesion, guaranteed satisfaction, and a 5-year warranty. Call Mr. Sandless today at 831-747-7476. That's 747-7476. Or MrSandless.com. That's MrSandless.com.
On Power Talk AM 1460 and FM 101.1. Streaming worldwide on iHeartRadio. Jan Price talks to the movers and shakers in the film business. The Jan Price Show.
We are back, and my guest today is director-producer Kimberly Reed, and we're talking about her brand new documentary called Dark Money. Kimberly, what do you want people, while they're watching this film, what do you want them to walk away with?
I want folks to understand that, when it comes to fixing the way that we fund our campaigns, there's a lot of bipartisan agreement. This is something that 75-80% of us can agree on. And that is pretty rare these days. There's not a lot of issues where you see broad agreement on the right and the left. And I think that it's important to focus on spots where we can make some progress, where we can fix systems that are busted and make them work better. And I think that that's ultimately going to help every citizen. And I hope folks also get a sense of a really strong sense of hope from that, because as we were just talking about before the break, California has some pretty strong campaign finance laws that may not be surprising to a lot of people. But to have strong campaign finance reform passed in Montana, which might be a surprising place for some people, I think shows you that this is something that can basically make it to all the other 48 states, where, if you reflect back to the campaigns that were run in 2016, essentially, Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump all had the same position on campaign finance reform. It's probably the only position that they all agreed on, but they were all talking about how this is broken, there's too much money in the system, it's corrupt, at least we got to drain the swamp, right? All of that stuff. Now, whether elected officials actually engage in campaign finance reform once they're in office, that's a totally separate question. So it's clear that this is something that appeals to a wide swath of the American public. It's just now up to us to hold our elected officials accountable so that, they know that this is an issue that voters really care about and are going to be voting on. And if you're not right on this issue, you're not going to get elected.
But people, politicians will run on a variety of, different issues because they think it's going to appeal to the voters. And then when they get voted in, then they don't do, not everyone, but many of them don't do what they say they were going to do. So do you have any thoughts on, as a voter who, as we want to educate ourselves, what we can do as voters to make sure and ensure that the people that we elect do what they say they're going to do?
Absolutely. What we saw in Montana in 2012, right, the first election cycle after Citizens United, what we saw then was a statewide ballot initiative where voters, again, by this 75-80% approval, told Montana's elected officials to go back to Washington, D.C. and do everything you can to repeal Citizens United. That was one of the first ballot initiatives like that passed in the U.S. There were many more to follow. About approaching half of the states have now gotten there. So that's one thing. Is these voter referendums, ballot initiatives is a way to get the word out. And I frankly see campaign finance reform working in the same way that marriage equality did, which was, starting with a proclamation coming from this mayor or this city council or a city council over there, and then add in a school board and another school board, really growing from the grassroots and moving up, because there's broad grassroots appeal for this issue. We just have to make sure that, once people get elected, we're holding their feet to the fire. And I would also hasten to add that this is something that we need, so what do you do in California, where you are, which has relatively strong campaign finance laws? Once those are in place, we just need to hold people, even if they're on the left, very accountable to, promising that they're dedicated to campaign finance reform and voting them out of office if they're not, and making sure that they're hearing loud and strong consistently from voters that this is a really important issue. That's what really moves the issue, and that's what really changes the day. The other thing you can do is there are two organizations that I'll point out that do good work on campaign finance across the U.S. One is commoncause.org. They have lots of state chapters all over the U.S. And another group is everyvoice.org.
Oh, good. Every Voice. Okay. Well, those are good. Everybody write those down so you can contact them. With the possible changing in the landscape of our Supreme Court, do you think some of these things will, will the Supreme Court halt, some of the campaign finance laws that we want to have changed? What do you think about that?
Citizens United has been so vastly unpopular with the American public. I actually think it really took the Supreme Court by surprise. The Supreme Court then included, Anthony Kennedy, who just retired as we talk, and Antonin Scalia, who passed away and was replaced by Gorsuch. So, even here's the thing to focus on, and this is where people can really derive a lot of hope and promise from what's going on with campaign finance right now. Even in the Citizens United decision, even with the Supreme Court that we have right now, in Citizens United, there's an 8-1 sub-decision that says the only reason we can say it's okay for corporations to give unlimited money is because we assume that we know where this money is coming from. We assume that we have disclosure that allows voters to make educated decisions about what the influence is on these elected officials or these candidates. Now, that is not happening because this dark money loophole has been developed. That dark money loophole hides where the money is coming from. And it basically flies in the face of the whole reasoning of Citizens United. But we still have that to go back to. These 8 justices, 8 out of 9, saying it's all about disclosure. That's the law of the land, too, as well as Citizens United. So what we can do is we can demand, again, at the city council and the school board, and we're starting to see all sorts of proclamations from city councils saying that the elections that they run in their city are going to be run in a clean way where we have to know where all of the money is coming from, and we're not going to allow it to be hidden in these dark money groups. We're demanding disclosure. So as you're calling your representatives and moving on this issue, demanding that we know where all of the campaign financing is coming from is something that is easily accomplished under the law of the land, even if we have the Supreme Court that we have right now or that we're about to get confirmed for decades. We can still focus on disclosure. And that's what's going to really shine a light on this problem of dark money and clean up our elections.
I agree, 100%. You're doing a good job with this movie. Definitely you are. And everybody should go find it. And we're going to talk a little bit about that when we come back from this break. You are listening to The Jan Price Show, all about movies on Power Talk 1460 and 101 FM. Like The Jan Price Show on Facebook and check out thejanpriceshow.com.
Have you ever dreamed of doing commercials or movies? Your dream starts with a desire. And if you have the desire to do commercials and feature films, we want to know about you. We're Moco Film, one of the Genesis companies that includes VoiceJock, a major provider of TV commercial talent to TV stations throughout the nation. Registering is free. Just go to mocofilm.com and fill out the information. That's MOCOfilm.com. You'll become part of a large talent bank available to producers. Go to mocofilm.com today and start living your dream.
The Century Theater at Northridge Mall is newly remodeled with luxury loungers in every auditorium. Oversized plush recliners are electric-powered reclining seats with extendable footrests, cup holders, and snack tables. Guaranteed comfort with all reserved seating. Reserve the best seat in town online at Cinemark.com or download the Cinemark app today. The Century Theater at Northridge Mall is newly remodeled.
On Power Talk AM 1460 and FM 101.1. Streaming worldwide on iHeartRadio. Jan Price talks to the movers and shakers in the film business. The Jan Price Show.
We are back, and my guest today is director-producer Kimberly Reed, and we're talking about a brand new documentary, Dark Money. Very timely movie. Kimberly, this documentary premiered at the Sundance Film Festival, and it won some awards. You've been winning lots of awards with this. You want to tell the audience a little bit about some of the awards you have won and the reception you got at Sundance?
Yeah, we won a producing award, which is a great one.
Yes.
A lot of people don't quite know what documentary producers do, but that's really where the rubber meets the road in terms of how films come together. So we were thrilled to win that. I was particularly honored to win an award. It was actually at the Montclair Film Festival, which is where a guy named David Carr used to work. He was an investigative reporter initially and a media critic for the New York Times.
Was this Montclair, New Jersey?
Montclair, New Jersey.
That's where it's my home. That's my home, actually. I lived right by there. Yeah. So
Montclair, New Jersey they have a great film festival, and they had an award for, the film that exhibits the, investigative reporting and independent journalist spirit that David Carr would have appreciated, and we were very honored to win that award. It was presented by his daughter, and that was wonderful too. So as we roll out, the reviews are great, and we're booking all sorts of cities across the country. We're doing I have a very aggressive outreach strategy where we're trying to put the film in the hands of the campaign finance movement, so that they can use the tool use the film as a tool to maybe demystify campaign finance a little bit, but at the end of the day, just give people a really compelling, entertaining film to watch.
And it is. It's a very compelling and entertaining film to watch. So where can people see this movie?
So we are opening actually tomorrow night. I'm not sure when this is going to air, but we're opening. It's going to air
July 28th.
July 28th. So you still, by the time you hear this, will have time to catch this in L.A. and San Francisco, where we open on the 27th of July. And then we're expanding out across the nation in August and September. We will be broadcast on POV, the PBS documentary strand.
Wonderful.
In the fall, but in plenty of time before the election.
Very wonderful. You're doing a lot of wonderful things, and so this is very timely before the elections. So hopefully there can be lots of places where people can catch this movie. What's next for you?
I'm just really focusing on rolling this out now, but I'm already got a couple irons in the fire for the next project. I'm interested in these investigative stories. I think they make compelling films, and if you can get on ones that show you how the media really works, I find that very interesting. Mm-hmm. So I'm working on a project about somewhat related about investigative journalism and media literacy, in a couple of different ways.
That's also very timely too, now with everything that's going on with fake media.
A lot of that.
Yeah.
Go crooked media. So, there's going to be lots of information about our rollout at darkmoneyfilm.com. They've got a screenings page where there's lots of information about the upcoming screenings. And I mentioned our outreach campaign, our impact campaign. There's a lot of resources there that allow people to plug in to different groups at the local level, to request screenings, to, find more information that kind of lives beyond just the 97 minutes of the film.
So repeat your website again.
Yeah, it's darkmoneyfilm.com.
Okay, darkmoneyfilm.com. Kimberly, what a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much. I love the work you're doing. This is a movie that everybody should see, especially as we do go to our midterm elections. So please seek it out. Thank you, Kimberly, for being on the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
You're so welcome. You have been listening to The Jan Price Show, all about movies on Power Talk 1460 and 101 FM. Like The Jan Price Show on Facebook and check out thejanpriceshow.com.